if we want to have our kids understand civics, if we want them to understand democracy, it's not the drive-by lesson. Sorry, that's an LA term. It's not a one-shot deal, right? So we have to live it. If we're gonna have democracy, if we're gonna have kids truly understand it, they need to live it on a day-to-day basis. Now, we all have the job charts, or something like that, right? Or the jobs and there's so many cute ones on Pinterest, etc. Why not make it about government? So this is actually a revised job chart, if you think about it. So I just turned this is following my local government, because in 3rd grade we studied local history, local economics, local government, local everything. And Glendora has a city council that looks very similar to this, only this is extremely simplified. So this is based on my city's city council, because we're studying local government. Now this is a bulletin board that stays up all year. So I want to create this foundation. And here's the thing, if kids can vote, if kids can have a choice, give it to them. Here's the simple rule. And in your classroom, if there's something that can be done by a kid should do it. That's how you build community. If the announcements can be read by a kid, let the kid read it. Let a kid read it. If they can feed the guinea pig, let them do it, right? So we need to step back and let them do it. Let them have control of their room. But this is my picture yourself in government. And what I did was I took a picture of each head on the very first day of school, and I made 2 prints of them. So the citizens stay the same, right? That never changes. Those little frame pictures are up there. The only time it changes is if someone moves or comes in new. And those stay all year with the idea that you are a citizen of this classroom. This is a community, our classroom community, and you live and work in it, therefore you are a citizen. And that's how we define citizenship. You live and work here, you are a citizen. So after that, we elect a city council. And I let the election ride. I really do. It's not everyone gets a turn on city council. The kids campaign. I've done it fancy, I've done it very simple. Sometimes they campaign, give speeches, and do all that. Sometimes it's as simple, I nominate so-and-so, I list their names on the whiteboard, we vote, it's done. It just depends what kind of time I have. But they vote on their city council. We discuss, but they've learned already what a city council is, that it's a governing body. They make decisions for the people of this classroom. So your city council needs to be responsible, respectful human beings and people that you look up to make decisions in your best interest. So they vote for those city council members. We have a mayor and a mayor pro tem and 3 other members. Now, when we run the elections, I let them, like I said, they actually, I vote we are in trimesters. So I change the city council 3 times a year, every trimester. And they know that. So sometimes the mayor's been the same for 2 of the 3 trimesters. Sometimes 3 members are the same. They just keep getting re-elected. And I'll have that one kid come up in class and say, this is Valbuena, I didn't get on city council. Like, oh, why do you think that is? Okay, work really hard to earn the respect of your classmates so that you're nominated next time. That's real life. I told them, I might want to be at the mayor of Glendora, but just because I want it doesn't mean I'm going to get it. Right? I have to work and earn it and be elected. So the same is true of the jobs. So of my 5 city council members, I'm the city manager because, come on, I need a little control, right? So I never change. And then those are what you see on the bottom are what would be my typical classroom jobs. I just renamed them. So we have public safety, community services, library planning and redevelopment, and public works. Now the kids have seen a document that looks a lot like this that says Glendora government, only it has a lot more at the bottom. As the attorney and maybe a dozen or more. But I've just simplified them. On my bulletin board you can see the job descriptions on the side, that never changes, and everyone has a job description, even the citizens. The citizens, it says, will participate in voting, will follow the rules and help enforce the rules. That's what citizens do. So everyone has a job description. The kids in the city council meet in the classroom once a month, like our real city council. And for us, it's a big treat to eat inside. Our lunch tables are outside. So they take their lunch tray from the cafeteria and sit on an outside table, but those 5 city council members get to walk their tray down to my classroom and eat in the classroom that day. And they run their city council meeting. I teach them the first day, very simple Robert's rules. All in favor say aye, when they're making a vote. I run the first meeting with them, and then I literally sit at my desk and let them run the meetings from there on. They do think their first job is to pick the jobs. So I lay out all the pictures of the kids, and they sit there and they debate and it's really fun to watch and listen. Should Julio be in library? Oh, I don't know, he's late all the time. We probably should pick someone who comes to school on time. Okay, how about, and they debate over who should have these jobs. He's really responsible. He doesn't mind if he sees blood. We should put him on the Band-Aid, the Band-Aid person. So they talk about it. They pick the people that they think would be good at that job. As the kids line up and come in from recess, the city council's on the front of the classroom, and they debrief. Okay, so we've chosen people to do their classroom jobs. Julio, would you accept the job of planning and redevelopment? And I stand there and just staple their picture up. And that's really all there is to it. They meet every month and discuss community problems. In 3rd grade, problems are like this. Juan is always late for lunch. He makes our line late for lunch, and we like to be first. What can we do? And we're not getting a perfect homework day because Stephanie's not finishing her homework. What can we do? And that's their problems. Those are real to them. So they develop a plan, and it's really cute. I've seen them say, well, let's talk to her. So Stephanie, can we have your phone number? Why? Because we want you to get perfect homework. We want you to do your homework because you're ruining our perfect homework scores, and we want to call you and remind you to do your homework. My mom's not going to want you to call me. Okay, well, could you just get your homework done? Guess what? Stephanie did her homework. That's all it took. I put her name in the book, I gave her the star, nothing worked for me. It took us a peer to say, look, can you just do your homework, because you're ruining it for us. And she did her homework. The kids got a perfect homework day, and then guess what? Stephanie was a hero. Yay, Stephanie, we got a perfect homework day. That was like candy, better than candy. She loved that feeling. Never stopped doing her homework, because she got praise for it every day from her peers. So this type of structure is something really easy to do. In 4th grade, we do state history, so you could run it as a state government. In 5th grade, you could design it as a national government model. In 2nd grade, we would run national too. It just depends what your standards say. But it's just a really easy and fun way to get government into your classroom and civics on a democracy on a day-to-day basis. My classroom went a little bit further with this, and we wanted to talk about voting and voting rights. So I read this book at the top, which is it's my favorite and only book that I know of that covers the history of voting rights in a picture book format. And it has a great timeline in the back, which I just copied, basically, and teacher-made bulletin board out of it from what's in the back. Now, what I did differently with creating this, we all have timelines. Like, timelines are one of our go-to tools, right? But what I did differently with this timeline, just to beef up the rigor, was simply to put the history of voting rights on the bottom, and then on the top were things that were happening in history in general. Guess it was this cause-effect moment that I didn't even have to say anything. Like, my standards go to 1850. In 5th grade, they're from the beginning of time to 1850. My timeline went into the 80s. I heard my students at recess on their own time in a little group around the bulletin board going, oh, that's why teenagers got the right to vote. Look, they were in the Vietnam War. They were dying for their country at 18, but they came back and couldn't vote till they were 21. That makes that was, they got all, I want kids to have that energy, right? We want to get under their skin. We want them to care like that. They were indignant. Yeah, no wonder, right? And so things start to make sense to them. when they could see the cause and effect. So just doing that simple tweak of this timeline increased the rigor and the learning by a lot. So we dove into the history of voting rights. The problem we were tackling was statistics. This was during the Obama election, and it was the best voter turnout in history, and it's still low. It was still less than half. I mean, have you taken a look at our voting statistics in this country? Really looked at them? Having kids look at them? So I didn't want kids to just look at them. We decided to study the history first. Like, people died for this right. People fought their entire lifetime for women to get the right to vote. This is a right that other people have fought for you. It's a privilege. And then I wanted kids to make that own connection themselves, like, whoa, people aren't voting, right? And so that they themselves would one day register to vote the second that they turn 18, right? So we took a close look at, sorry, I keep clicking the wrong thing. That's a close-up look at the timeline. And then we took a look at voter registration statistics in California. So, oh no, sorry, this is the US. So this is fascinating, just from any standpoint. So we've discovered that 35% of people who are eligible to vote, and they knew all the rules for having to vote. You have to be 18, blah, blah, blah. They knew the three ways to be a voter, that you could register to vote. So if 35 people were registered that were, of the people eligible to vote, 35% are not registered. Okay, so that means 65%, I'm getting my math in here, right, with the kids? 65% of people who can vote are registered to vote. So just a little over half. That's alone is wild, isn't it? So we have 65% of people who are registered to vote. And of those 65 registered voters in California, 55% voted in the last election. And that was the highest rate in history. My kids were pissed. They were, and that's what we want. We want to get under their skin. Like, well, what can you do about it? This is crazy, right? I don't say that, they do. It comes from them. That's when it's powerful. We did some more investigating. We looked at voter turnout rate in 2010. I wanted to get in a little geography here, like, so I showed them this map, and it was interesting. I had asked them, well, why do you think so? And with their very limited knowledge, I asked them, why do you think the Southeast has such a low voter turnout rate? And in their very sweet way, they said, because of the weather. I just think that's interesting, that's the mind of a 10-year-old. Because I really couldn't get into politics and demographics and economics right then. It's a lot of heavy stuff. But, you know, I just showed them that there are different places where the voter turnout rate, look at New Hampshire. Good job. We looked at political cartoons. Kids get this. They understood apathy at that point. Why are our citizens apathetic? I'm not going to be. That was magic to my words. Right? I mean, magic to my ears, right? To hear them say, I'm not going to be like that. I'll be 18 in 8 years, and I'm going to vote as soon as I can. We looked at quotes. And ultimately, they decided they wanted to do something about it, other than vote when they turn 18. They decided they wanted to make sure everyone was at least registered to vote. So they set up we have a farmer's market every Wednesday night in the city. We got permission to set up a voter registration booth and just worked on it. And a lot of times it started with their parents getting registered to vote. And other than that, we made public service announcements on little flip cameras. You know, they're not popular anymore, but they're unbreakable. It's a one button, you know, kids would videotape. I got them in the computer lab and Microsoft Movie, and they made their 1-minute PSAs. We put them on our class website, and we made these pamphlets. And I just chose 2 of them and color copied 100 of each, and they folded them up and handed them out at different places. We put them on the desk at City Hall, same thing. Not everybody's, just I picked the really good ones, right, to photocopy and put out. So that's how that one ends, and hopefully that gives you some ideas for things that you might be able to tweak and put into your classroom. I'm going to give you like 3 minutes at your table. If you could, you're at grade level places right now. You all know each other's standards pretty well. If you could just take a minute to brainstorm maybe what of ideas that I've presented today that worked for a seed for you, that thought that maybe you could replicate or tweak or do differently, or what have you tried already, or just brainstorm quickly for 5 minutes, or 3, just a few minutes, on ideas that you have that might work in your classrooms for civic action projects.
Any time for that kind of thinking?
We're going to dive right and take a deeper look into how to do that. And hopefully you'll leave today with some plans in place for you to use in the fall or throughout, if you're starting summer school. I'm not sure what your situations are. There are a lot of resources. So on my opening slide, I just did a quick investigation into your particular situation. And it seems as though your 2 top organizations are this one. So yay, you found it, and thanks for being here. And your New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies, which is a branch of the National Council for the Social Studies. If you're not a member and you don't belong to any professional organizations yet, I would recommend this one highly. If you do belong to a professional organization, ditch them and join us. It is just an amazing group of people. The National Council has an annual conference. Next year it's in Chicago. We do a lot of great work with the C3. It's an amazing opportunity. And I haven't had a lot of experience with your state council. California's is very strong if you ever want to come out to the West Coast. Our state conferences are really big, and we love them and do great things there. I saw on your website that your state is currently revising your standards, or your framework, I mean. So I think your framework is from 2006. And so that 2006 document is being revised. So while you're in the interim, that's an old document. And we were in the same boat. I had textbooks that were 14 years old until recently. While you're in the interim, it's super important for you to know the C3 and to push on ahead, even, start now with your inquiry-based instruction, with your civics. Before your document comes out, you'll be ahead of the curve, and that's always a great place to be. Plus, we have a crop of kids coming through, and I don't know about you, but I get tired waiting for my government to finish documents and frameworks and standards. We got to teach these kids and get them ready for the future. So I encourage you to take a look at the C3 framework. If you haven't seen it, it's online. I'm old, so I like to have a paper copy, which you can order through the National Council of Social Studies. So on your desk, on your tables, I put a couple magazines from the National Council of Social Studies. And I actually have an article in there, and the reason I had extra copies is because they sent me a bunch, because I'm in there. But the reason I gave it to you so you could remember the organization, but also if you like that voting rights, that's what the article's about. So that whole voting rights lesson unit is in there in an article form. But that's a great magazine. The $65 you pay to belong to National Council is worth that magazine. It's amazing. I use it, and it has black lines in it, and the website's amazing, and the conference and the magazine alone make it worthwhile. So anyway, consider that. Also, I'd like to encourage you, not that I'm pushing my own state, but our framework's pretty awesome. And we just got it published last June 14th. Well, it's 2016 now, so 2 years ago. We're really proud of it. It's a lot of the language of the C3, but I encourage you to, if you are in the need of resources, to just take a look at our front matter and our appendices. It's a really good document and available online. and it's on the California Department of Education's website. Out of that document is this paragraph. Our State Board of Education, working together with other organizations, teachers, administrators, and districts, talk about how to utilize the framework over time to, and this is our goal, design, implement, maintain a coherent course of study, teach content, develop inquiry-based critical thinking skills, improve reading comprehension and expository writing ability, promote the engaged and knowledgeable citizenry in history and related social sciences. Doesn't that say it all? Right? That says it all. And that's in page 1 of our framework. If any of you have the opportunity, I don't know how your state works, if they let teachers work on those types of documents, get involved. Because we need real teacher voices in those kinds of situations. In the C3, just a quick reminder, there are the 3 foundations of history, social science. That inquiry arc, that's the how we get kids to do this. Disciplinary literacy, that's what they need. They need that academic language, the language of the discipline. And then civic life is what they do with it at the end. And getting them ready for those things. In the C3 framework, if you're familiar with it, this looks familiar to you. If you've not read it before, it's comprised of 4 dimensions. They call them the 4 dimensions. The first dimension of the C3 framework is how inquiry begins, developing those compelling questions and planning the inquiry. The little light bulb icon means that you will have students applying interdisciplinary concepts and tools. That's where you incorporate history, civics, economics, and geography in your units of study. They're not separated, but all within a unit of study. So when I'm studying voting rights, I'm going to cover geography, economics, civics, obviously. Sometimes it's an easy hit, and history, all in the same unit. Those 4 things are interwoven. The little check mark is dimension 3. That stands for evaluating sources and using evidence. And this is like this hugest skill ever, right? Back in my day, I would go when I went to do research, I went to the library, and the librarian would hand me a book, and I would be pretty sure that it was a credible source because it was published. And the librarian gave it to me. And that's not the case anymore. That's not the case anymore. Kids get online. Anyone can write anything. Being published doesn't really mean a whole lot anymore. Our kids need skills we didn't have to have. They need to look at a source and find out if it's credible. We have to teach this to kids. Who's the author? Where's he from? And who does he hang out with? Those are the things I teach my students. Like, you're on a website? Where's this from and who do they hang with? Those are the things you need to know. You can't let Google be your vetting source. And I show them a few examples. If you Google, it's not true anymore, but because they changed it. But if you, at one point, Googled Martin Luther King Jr., the first thing that popped up was an anti-Semitic website. And kids, what do they click on? The first one. I had them look at that. Who wrote this? Oh, he's a member of the KKK. Should we use this source? No. And just so you know, teachers, there are sites designed for this type of instruction. For example, the one I love to use, it's called Save the Tree Octopus. It's an entirely fake website about octopus that live in trees. It looks 100% real. It shows you a map. It gives you resources. It has a video. It shows you tree octopy, I guess, in history. It looks, I show it to them. I said, what do you think? I saw this and I'm so worried about these animals. And I let them look at it and they will buy into it. It looks 100% real. And then I stop, like, do you think this is a credible source? Yes. Why do you think it's a credible source? Okay, and then we look at it. But you have to see this website. It's insane. It looks so real. You can buy pink ribbons for the back of your car in the shape of a magnet. You know those magnet ribbons? It says Save the Tree Octopi. And there's other ones about fake countries and things. Like, the teachers have made them for this purpose, to teach students to vet their websites, right? Simple lessons like teaching them the difference between .com, .edu, .org. like what would be a credible website and what to use. So we need to teach our kids to evaluate sources for everything they read, and that's it goes right into English language art, it goes into life. Fake news, right? It goes into all this. Know what you're reading. And finally, the last one, which is our big one today, communicating conclusions and taking informed action, which is dimension 4 of the C3 framework, which is why we're here today. That's the civics piece, how to take action. So that's just a quick overview of that document. If you are only going to read one thing, read the introduction. Okay? It's a great document, give you a nice overview. As we take this inquiry arc, which the whole thing is designed on, this idea of an inquiry arc, the students are asked a compelling question, or better yet, they come up with a compelling question. Through the middle are dimensions 2 and 3, their research, their learning, they're getting their content, they're researching, and at the end, they answer the question, right? That's how the arc is situated. They answer the question in the form of a summative argument. And we sometimes as elementary, we're like, oh, I don't teach argument. No, you have to. That's the idea of having a claim and backing it with evidence, right? So sometimes we think it's opinion writing, and we do want them to write art, but not always their own opinion. Sometimes they have to write, even if they personally don't agree, they still need to back an idea with evidence, and that's when you know that they can do it. So sometimes I tell them, okay, there's 2 sides to this. I'm going to tell you which side to write on, and you're going to write to it, not the one you believe in necessarily, right? So that they're able to see both sides and do that. So questions are where civic action starts. And in these content-rich subject areas such as social studies, teaching and learning have traditionally focused on finding facts first and answering them, right? And then finding facts and thinking later. But we want kids to think up front. That's why we ask the question to start with. I mean, traditionally, don't we usually teach out of the history book and ask questions at the end to see if they got it? And we're just putting the question at the front and getting them excited to learn. So, students at the center. Understand when you're planning this, that when you do, and this is sometimes hard for teachers because we like to be organized, we like to have our plans, but we got to let go. The heavy lifting is done by the kids, right? You are in the role of facilitator. Student learning is at the center. It's not you. It's not the sage on the stage, but what do they call it? The guide on the side. Right? Have you heard that before? So understand that your civic action isn't an event. It's the process. It's the process where they learn. The process is the important part, and sometimes it's messy, right? Sometimes your plans are like, ooh, not doing that today, or this took that much time instead of this much time, and you have to be okay with that. And sometimes that's an uncomfortable place to be. But learning is messy, right? So allow your kids to have control of it, and sometimes that means it gets a little different than you originally planned. And that's okay. You're facilitating this process. So where to begin? You know your standards, right? You always have your standards in the back of your mind because they'll be embedded throughout this. It's during that process that your standards are practiced and mastered in ELA, in history, social science, etc. I wanted to share this is a question that can go for anyone. And we did this, I have a group of teachers in what we call our LIFT groups. It's Learning Inquiry for Teachers, which is our little professional development communities. And I have a group of teachers that focus just on civics and history, social science. So last year, we decided to all take the same question, regardless of grade level, and to see what it would look like in different grade levels. And could we do it? And this was our question. This was the compelling question. What makes a good citizen? So if you're stuck with, I don't know where to go with my action project, this is a really good place to start. Because at the beginning of the year especially, aren't we all developing community, making our classroom rules anyway? You're already having this discussion. So your classroom is a community. And in grades K and 1, perhaps that's what we're talking about when we talk about community service. It's the community. Perhaps you are talking about your school community. Perhaps third's talking about neighborhood and you are more global, right? Because we want to stay with our standards and our developmental appropriate level. So kindergartners don't understand world problems necessarily. But they understand what happens when the ball keeps getting kicked over the fence, and that's a problem. So we start with what makes a good citizen, and I want you to keep that in your mind in case when I give you the time to plan, that might be a place to start. So just a quick sampling to share with you how it started in second grade. This is my second grade school teacher at Cullen Elementary in Glendora, and they were having this discussion about what makes a good citizen, and these were very typical things that happen at the beginning of the year. Plus, Constitution Day is September 17th. Slides right in there with what does it mean to be a good citizen of this country. And then we take a look at our Constitution, which sets up the guidelines for that. It all just ties in like poetry, right? At that beginning of the year unit. So they were having discussions of, we are all citizens of this classroom community. They obviously looked at their scholastic news. They did some reading. They came up with these definitions, which remained in their classroom for the year. From that discussion came this document. So I tried to use, okay, that's why. I thought I would just try it. They came up with this document and they called it their 3 R's. It's a second grade standard to talk about their classroom community. And they, for this particular class, they talked about their rights, their responsibilities, and the rewards they get for having excellent citizenship, because at that age level, rewards and tangible rewards are important. In 5th grade, they can be more intrinsic. So that discussion led to this document. They did the meat and content by typical things, reading read-alouds, getting on iPads and investigating pictures, doing primary source photo analysis. So just asking questions, digging deep into content, and then they wanted to do some informed action. So the second grade, they focus in our state, one of the big focus questions is on people that make a difference. So, you know, the typical hero unit, right? So this particular class decided, well, we can all make a difference. So let's figure out how we as a group can engage and improve our school and our community. So they brainstormed things on the playground that could use some fixing, and they used a Google form. So this teacher's really into Google Classroom, so we went with it as much as we could. So she sent that form out to her students, and the data came back, and they looked at it. They looked and decided what can they do to make their community better, and then they ranked them. So you can see on the side, they tallied what would be most important. So in second grade, in a very democratic way, they identified their problem. And I'm going to ask you to do this a little bit later, but we all use this same concept of a tree. We all drew trees in our classroom or did them electronically, but the problem is the trunk. The consequences are the top of the tree, but we really want to take a look at the roots. So once we've identified what we think is a problem in our community, because we want kids to come up with this. We're not going to walk into the classroom and say, hey guys, guess what we're going to do? We're going to collect money for, that doesn't work. There's no buy-in. So kids have to have the problem themselves and look at the causes of the problem. What are the roots of the problem? Let's tackle one of the roots. So in this particular case, this is second grade, the problem is the balls go missing all the time at recess. It's a problem. People fight over it, then they have nothing to do, then they get in trouble. The consequences at the top of the tree, they have less balls on the playground. It costs the school money to replace them. Mr. Richard is the custodian. He gets mad, exclamation point. The root of the problem, our ball box is right on the playground. Balls get kicked over the fence often. So do you see how easy it is now to tackle the root? It's easy now for a second grader to go, what can we do about this? Because sometimes community problems are huge. Even for us, like, I don't know what to do, right? So it helps kids narrow it down. Let's pick a problem and vote on how we can make it better. So in this particular case, they decided to make signs. So they got on their computer and they made handmade and computer said they got the message out. I love this one. Please keep the balls away from the fences. Mr. Richard would really like that. And so they posted, it's pretty simple, But second graders feel empowered by this. They feel a part of the school community. And as, quote, silly as it might seem for us as adults, it's not, they're very serious. They feel like change makers. They feel like the bosses. They feel like they have done something worthwhile. And they themselves are walking around now reminding kids about this problem. Results, at the end of it, and it didn't last that long, but at the end of it, they interviewed the custodian, and he says, quote unquote, less balls are going over the fence, but it is still a problem. And now they had to figure out what next. And this continued to go on. They're going to help other classrooms do the same thing. So they got their classroom balls under control. Now we're going to work on the school and that whole thing. So I know it seems very simple, but it's a very effective way to get kids started. In fourth grade across town, they did the same thing. What makes a good citizen? And then they worked on words. What words can we identify with that define a good citizen? They took those words and then began to look in their literature for examples of characters that did those traits, that had those behaviors. And see what I mean about integrating? All day long, every day. So they're reading My Father's Dragon. Elmer's corrupt. He lies to animals, and he's irresponsible and it explains why. So they're now looking at characters in books through the eyes of civics. Having Socratic seminars. Debating why people do things the way they do. Okay, well, he did something bad, but he did it for a good cause. Is that okay? Oh, now we can introduce civil disobedience. Fourth grade's not too early for that. When you see a rule that isn't right, do you follow it? And what are the proper ways to change a rule? After examining citizenship through the eyes of literary characters, the students undertook the task of gathering data and from the community to discuss what makes a good citizen. So sending letters out to our mayor, to our city council, to regular citizens, asking what is it that makes a good citizen. Getting information from the school community with these, we call them graffiti charts, right? So they're out on the playground, and random children will walk up. We have split recess, so we have recess is 3-4. It's 2-3 and 3 and 4-5. They're out on the playground at different times, so we got different responses. They even used different colors, so they knew what grade level it came from what. So like blue was one recess, red was one, so they could figure it out. They also made their tree. What they wanted to do was give kids something to do at recess, because kids are getting in trouble at recess constantly because they're bored. So they decided they would create clubs. Their mascot's the Cougars. So club is an acronym. It stands for Cougars Learn Unity by Service. You can see that they identified their problem. They identified the root of the problem, and then they went for it. So this particular class of fourth graders nominated clubs that they would be in charge of, and they took charge of it. This is all happening at recess. And created clubs for other kids to join. There's the poster club. This is what it looked like on a typical day after the clubs were made. We had a sewing club, a chess club, a poster club. Kids couldn't wait to go to recess. This is the poster club. They wanted to create a more positive school atmosphere. That was their goal. And so each week they designed a set of interactive posters and encouraged students to participate in writing on them. This was a club called the Looking Glass Club, which was basically a service club. And this is a personal reflection. I joined the Looking Glass Club because I thought it would be a fun experience. I think the club gave me courage to speak, and it let my voice be heard. The clubs gave me bravery to be a leader and not a follower. This will be an amazing memory for me because I gained a lot of things from this club. I joined the Looking Glass Club because I wanted to be involved in my school, and I have a say in making my school a better place. When Mrs. Marston offered our class to participate in the civic engagement project, I was eager to learn more about the topic that was mostly a mystery to me. Without Mrs. Marston drawing me to this opportunity of a lifetime, wow, I would have never been able to share the pride and joy of the original club starters and make Sutherland Elementary a better place. There's a lot of pride there. Guarantee that child will go to middle school and be on ASB, or what we call our student government. So, thoughts. Take a minute at your table to regenerate and make that list a little longer. Maybe you have a new idea or some other idea. Just give you a few minutes. List out some possible things that intrigue you that might be doable at your site. When you think about what your students might identify as a community, as a problem they want to address, or an action that they would like to take, decide first, and this will just take us a minute, just discuss and decide, what will be your definition of community in your classroom? What will be most appropriate for your grade level? Will it be your classroom community, your school community, your neighborhood, your city, your state, your country, your world? How would you best define, when you know your standards and know your students, what would make the most sense for you as you lead your students through this project? What kinds of problems are we going to ask them to think about, and on what level? And just incidentally, that's Glendora. That's downtown Glendora, if you come visit. It's really quaint. Those are the San Gabriel Mountains, and they're famous for their little trees that are shaped like gumdrops. I want you to think about the way your students might answer this. So somewhere on your paper, if you want to work on a joint paper and someone records, if you all want to write, it's up to you. But in the next step, so we know what our community, we've got that in our minds. I know first grade's thinking about their classroom, and they might expand into the school community. But what would your students say? I want you to think in the mind of your students. If you ask them, okay, let's look at our school community or our classroom community, what could we do to make it run smoother? What problems might they say? Would you take a few minutes to list out some problems your students might notice within the community that you identified? If you were actually going to hone in on one of those problems, and you made one of these trees with your students, I want you to do that and see what that is like. So I didn't give you a chart paper, but if you could use a blank piece of paper, one per table, draw a tree. And I'd like you to think about, now that hone in on one problem that the 4 of you or 3 of you or 2 of you can work on. Is it the fact that there's bullying on the playground? Is it that they don't have enough to do at the obviously if it's bullying on the playground or people are getting in trouble, one of the causes might be the same as you saw in my second grade example. Kids don't know how to play games on their own. They don't know the rules to Foursquare. They don't know how to play on their own. They spend their 20 minutes of recess arguing about rules. So what could be a solution? Kids can make the rules and teach each other how to play. So I'd like you to work on one problem just for 5 minutes. I won't give you a whole lot of time. But this is I'm walking you through this because these are the steps you take with your students. Minus that community step, you don't need step 1. That was for you. But step 2, you might do whole class. What are some things that we see are issues in our community? And you're doing this whole class with them. You make the tree whole class with them. And this is over time, not in all one day, not all in one day. And I'm going to talk to you in a little bit about how to get started with the kids so there's buy-in, because there's little tricks to use. But just a few minutes, if you could work together to make this tree. Your issues, the trunk, the impact are the top of the tree, and what are the root causes of this problem? The roots of your tree, and you see all those different causes. Select one that you could focus on with your students. So brainstorm and discuss what could you tackle, and really seriously think about your constrictions. What time can you spend on it? Realistically, is it going to be all year? Is it going to be during a unit? Does it fit in nicely at the beginning, unit 1 of your literature? How would that fit? And that's why you're in groups, to collaborate with that. What do you have resources available? If that were if that were a problem, would you have resources that children could access to solve the problem? Are there materials for them to read? Are there things for them that they could write? Is there something for them to actually do? Is this about common good? And what action projects might they be able to do to solve this problem? Would it be poster creation? Would it be making a PSA? Would it be a website? Would it be a play for younger students? How and what could your students do to solve this problem? If you're having trouble in that area, then select a different one. Do you know what I'm saying? You look at it and say, okay, this isn't feasible. Let's think about a different twist or tweak it in a different way. So if this would be your idea for your students' first project or a project that you would try next year, and they're tackling a problem, what one could they do? Just brainstorm the answer to those questions for a few minutes. See what you come up with. Now you have this idea, you have this little seed of an idea, and I know I can already hear you naturally thinking of activities you're going to do to lead kids through it. But truthfully, this is going to start with a question. And so we want to create a compelling question that kids will hopefully come up with themselves. And I'll share some strategies for getting kids to ask that question that becomes this compelling question, because we're going to solve a problem that's their idea, hopefully, or something close. So it's time to draft our compelling question. Knowing what you have this idea of the problem. You have this idea of how kids could solve it, because remember, we backward plan. How's this ending? Let's go from there. We know what we might have them do, because remember, it's messy and could change slightly, but you have this concept. What compelling question could you come up with? So let's review quickly. A compelling question has certain components. It's not the same as a focus question. A compelling question is rigorous and relevant. It's where those two things intersect. So whatever the answer is, students will have to answer it they have to do something rigorous in order to answer it. It's not a yes/no question. In fact, it's open-ended and unanswerable many of the time. My voting one was, does voting matter? That's a debatable question. My Westward Movement unit, the question is moving to a new location worth the risk? Do you see the difference? That's not what were the hardships on the Oregon Trail. They still have to know the hardships of the Oregon Trail in order to answer that question, which is the magic, right? They still need to know all those things in order to answer this global question. But they're rigorous, they're relevant to students. We want to write them in a way that's kid-friendly. We want them to be neutral and unbiased, so we don't want to lead them, why was Columbus an invader? We aren't going to lead them in one way or another. They also have to be neutral and open-ended. In fact, sometimes they're never answerable, or they're answerable multiple ways always. Was the Revolutionary War revolutionary? Is a compelling question that we've used before. We want to, whatever your question is, it needs to do the job of motivation. Your students, you got to get under their skin a little bit. You want them to be motivated to investigate. You want them to come to school every day with the desire to answer that question. What can we do today to answer that question? So the way this works is you have a compelling question, we visit it daily, and then we learn a little bit, and we visit that question again. If learnings happened, the answers changed a little bit from yesterday. And every day that I read something, or every day I watch a little video, or every day I do something, my answer to that question changes a little. So does voting matter? Okay, well, I just read some things and I've done some more activities. I believe this now and here's why. Or I've added to that argument. Or I've changed my mind a little bit. That's actually what learning feels like, right? Our students sometimes forget what real learning feels like. Learning doesn't feel like I dutifully completed this worksheet, I'm done, now can I read my book? You know, so often that's what they think school is. That's not learning. Learning is a little edgy, right? You've changed when you learn. You grow when you learn. We want kids to feel those things. There's a little discomfort in that. It's good. That's how you learn. That's when dendrites are built. That's when you grow. So if you could take a few, this is not as easy as you think. I'm not lying. It takes me sometimes a couple days to write a really good, compelling question, but toy with it. Come up with a draft compelling question for today. And maybe you want to use what is a good citizen or you want, but keep those things in mind, open-ended globally. I'm going to ask you to share at the end because I just want to hear what your table came up with. So come up with a good, compelling question. Were you able to think of projects that they could do?
We came up with, looking at the schedule for the students, maybe alternate their schedule, maybe a letter to the principal or the teacher talking about the importance of the snack time, being independent or being separate from independent work time, surveying other classrooms to see.
I was just going to ask, what research could you do?
Perfect.
Yeah.
What type of, how much work gets done when snack time is separate from independent work.
There's good research you could read on that. That's a good one. Anyone else have one to share? I won't pressure you, but it would be great to hear. Yes, 3rd grade.
So when we made our tree, our trunk was bullying. There's a lot of the children.
Right.
So, talk about how kids aren't nice to them. So the roots, one of the roots was there's not enough to do outside. And they, get carried away. So if we keep them busy, they wouldn't think of that. So our compelling question was, how can we keep all students happy and involved at recess? And maybe they could survey the other, because usually at schools it's one grade level, but even if it isn't, they could survey, what would you like to, what are some things you'd like to do at recess?
What makes you happy at recess?
I think we can get them engaged with each other.
Yes.
And
lots of opportunity for talking, which kids need to do, and problem solve together.
Right, and then they feel better about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then that is going to decrease, because usually the bullying happens when kids don't feel good about themselves.
Correct. That's awesome. Good. Anybody else? 5th grade?
We thought of, is self-respect important?
Is self-respect important? That's very open-ended. I love it. And were you able to think of some activities? Not that far. How about the other 5th grade table?
Ours has to do with lunchtime, and we said what makes the lunchroom a happy, healthy place.
Good. So it's very similar. What makes the lunchroom happy and healthy? Right. Because if we're in a community, we live and work together, and we want to be happy and healthy, right? Basic human desires. Anybody else? No pressure, just ask. Missing pencils. We got to start somewhere. Uh-huh.
So our compelling question was, are pencils necessary for learning?
That's a really great way to turn that very simple problem into a really good, compelling question. Are pencils necessary for learning? And because they are, we need to keep them nice. I see where you're going. Awesome. So this next step, I usually give the teachers that I'm working with this form, and it fits our standards, but I'm going to have you take a piece of paper and fold it in half. You need a blank piece of paper and fold it in half. At the top of your paper, write the question that you came up with, the compelling question that you have. Put it horizontal, so the line is in the middle, and you have 1/2 and 1/2. Question at the top. Put your compelling question at the top, and just underline it. Then you have a column for each side, like a T-chart. if you don't have your compelling question, just your topic works. And this is like a very important part of the planning stage for teachers. So this is not something you do as students. This is specifically for you teachers. So when you look at this next step, I gave you the 2 bottom boxes that I want you to think about. So instead of doing this whole thing, because it matches what we do, the bottom one, I want you to just put one side would be content and one side is skills. So when you're thinking about this question, in order for students to answer this question, what content will they need to learn? Just list it, bullet list it. Are they going to what will they have to read or learn about? And then what skills will they need? For example, will they need to be able to converse? Will they need to be able to read nonfiction text? Will they need to be able to write an opinion paragraph? What is the content? What are the skills needed in order for students to answer your question? Work together, create your 2 lists. Okay, let's talk about that next step of, I turned this into a 10-step process, and what I'm walking you through is what I've actually done myself in the last, 10 years or so that I've been doing these types of projects. Like these are the actual steps that I go through and that my teachers go through when they're planning it. So it kind of just gives you a taste of what you do as a teacher and what you do with your students. Like the tree you do with the students, but I wanted you to experience it because that's what you would do whole class with them. The rest of these steps are all teacher steps. So you're looking at, and so now you have your list of skills and standards. Really, it's from there that you just design your lessons. Like that's your backbone of your lessons. Now you see, these are the things I need to teach. I just step my way through it. I'm gonna do this in 12 lessons. In those 12, then you start doing your teacher magic, right? In my 12 lessons, where will I fit into these? We're gonna read this book, we're gonna read that, we're gonna this, that, and the other. That 7th step though, so we kind of have this skeleton plan going of things kids need to know, and we'll get them there with our individual lessons. But that step 7, I really want you to think about this because it's such an important step. How do you create buy-in with students? What can you do? You see what your question is. You see where you're going with this. What can you do initially to create a stir, to stir interest, to get under their skin a little bit, to introduce this idea to students without telling them they're going to do this? What can you give to them to pull out that information from them? How can you lead students to come up with this question on their own? Let's go back to that example of the military personnel, right, where we wrote the book. I knew where I was going with it. We brought the speaker in. Sometimes it starts with a guest speaker. That whole agricultural unit started with this. I literally came in with a bottle of orange juice, and in Glendora we have one industry. We used to have 2, Rainbird and Naked Juice, which you might have out here. But Naked Juice is it's from Glendora. It's a small city, so it's like we don't have a lot of industry. But it was one of my economics. I'm going to go with it for economics. But I brought it, and I'm like, I stopped off to get this juice, and I turned around, and it's made in Glendora. And I started to think, how did these oranges get into here? How did this juice get into this? And I stopped. I literally just made it like a conversation before I took attendance. And in my coffee cup is, the juice, and then just dropped it. The next day, I was thinking about that juice again. And I was looking around, and I found this, and I started showing posters of how juice is made, right? Then they got interested in agriculture. Well, where are they grown? Let's find out. Now it's theirs, right? So what can you do to stepstone your kids to make it theirs? My voting one, I literally framed them. I framed them up. We had a senior from the high school come in and talk about the qualifications you need to be. They run Democracy in Action. So they, as part of their class, they run mock elections for elementary school students. So they had come in to do their 20-minute, these 5 seniors come in and do a 20-minute lesson as part of their class, teaching 5th graders what you need to have in order to register to vote. So my kids started to talk about voting, and I literally picked one kid, some kid who doesn't participate very often, and I pulled it out of him. His name was Jose, and I said, well, what do you think about that? He's like, I don't know. I don't know if it even matters. But that's a really good question. Does voting matter? Jose, that was awesome. Great question. Next day, let's look back at Jose's question. He said, does voting matter? Now I write it on the board. Thank you so much. High five, man. That was a great question to have. Let's take a look at that. And then our unit started. Everyone in the entire class from that moment on knew it was his idea. And it was theirs. So what type of activity? Can you bring in a guest speaker? Can you do a little scenario? Can you draw attention to something that you want them to see? In first grade, we were chatting. One of their problems is like messiness on campus. You know, just trash everywhere and kids saying, well, it's not mine. So what can you do for that? We were just brainstorming real quickly, and I don't know if this will be where they go, but what if you took pictures of that one day after school and just threw it up the next day? So this is what our campus looked like at the end of the day. What do you think? Drop it. Next day, I can see that it's really bothering you. There's all this trash, that really isn't a good way for us to live. I wonder if there's anything we can do about that. Drop it. A little bit later. Do you see what I mean? Build it so they say it. So it's their issue. Talk and come up and jot down whatever ideas you can. How will you create buy-in for this? In step 8, and it's really not a linear step, but it makes sense. And I just want to lead you through it once. And then when you get used to it, you'll develop your own way to do your own planning. But when you have your planning guide, which is what you just made, that you've already done this naturally, but your next step in this process would be to think about your activities. So what activities will you use to build the necessary content and those skills? So as you look at those, you know how you would introduce it. I'm going to bring in my guest speaker. I'm going to present this scenario. I'm going to show a picture of this. Let's say we've done that. The kids have come up with their question. You know where you're going. You would just start to plan your activities. So just know that that is your next step. We can't get that done today in the next 3 minutes or 10 minutes. Those are things that take time and for you to look through resources and share and collaborate with other teachers. But now that you have this and I know you, I already know your type. You're going to be on the computer looking for resources and Pinterest, even when it's your summer vacation. But you'll just keep these things in the back of your mind so that you can look for resources that match it. Might be articles, might be things that pop up in the newspaper. I'll give you some resources. There's a C3 website called c3teachers.org where they have inquiry-based units. There are a plethora of resources on the internet, but it's always from my practice easier to know what I want and then look for it. Otherwise, you get lost, right? There's a rabbit hole in that thing, and you come out more confused than when you went in because there's just too much out there. So you know your direction. Stay with your project and look for things that support your project, as opposed to going online and openly looking because it's just overwhelming. You're like, oh, that's good. Then you dive and click and click and click, and 2 hours later you pick your head up, and you still, you made 3 pins, So our next step is to look at that planning guide, and you would naturally consider, okay, how many days? Where can I fit my ELA inclusion? Look at my writing standards, look at my reading standards, pull out some primary sources. For example, in my voting unit, I pulled out Elizabeth Cady Stanton's speech that they read and analyzed. What books will you bring in? What documents? What primary sources? I know a lot of you have like the pencil thing, but like what can you find that talks about organization and work environment? Maybe it's even a health magazine. Where can you find things that kids can back up this with real research and do the investigation? As you move into finishing this out, you wanted to figure out how will you evaluate your students. So just write yourself a note. When at the end of this, how will I evaluate my students? How will I know they've learned something? And how will I have students reflect on this experience? Whether it's a journal writing, whether they are interviewed. Remember, that component, that step is very important. We don't want to be accused of doing fluffy things, right? Everything we do is standards-based and has a reason. And I will evaluate and prove that they've learned. And as a professional, we always do that anyway. But just kind of, is it the I am poem? Is it a checklist? What is it that these are things that are hard to evaluate, but what will you use? Even if it's just their reflection, maybe the child's reflection alone is what you're after. And then the final step is how will you celebrate with your students and communicate your conclusions? So after you've done this, do you let them share what they've learned with their parents? Do they get to write a letter in the PTA newspaper? How will they communicate what they've learned? Let them have a chance to do this. Do they get a paragraph on your website? Can they make a website? And that celebratory piece, for me, it's been the parade. It's been even afterwards, we've got 5 people registered to vote this week. You know, how do we celebrate? Just little celebrations like that. But we want to make sure that our students have that chance to communicate their conclusions. There's a book out called The Guide to Service Learning. This template is in the back. And this is one of thousands. When I say you can go online and find planning templates. I just want to show you one example. But the book called The Complete Guide to Service Learning is one that I love. It's noted on the bottom, and I'm going to be giving this presentation to you, and you'll have access to it. But it just steps you through some other things. But know that there's support out there. I mean, you don't have to invent these things from scratch, but the purpose of today is to get you to dive in, have that idea, know the process, and then run with it, as opposed to going random online and picking someone else's. As we're all, the art of being a teacher is knowing the pedagogy behind it. No one knows your students like you do. No one knows your particular situation like you do. So I think we want to make sure that we always stay true to our art and trust yourselves. We know how to write a lesson. We know how to make things work best for our own students. We'll end with a quote. Inquiry-based civic action projects resurrect idealism, compassion, and altruism. We cannot survive as a nation unless we hold on to these qualities and teach them to our children, and our youngest children at that. So I wish you much luck with it. I would love to hear how your projects go. And if you have questions or need resources, just an email away. Thank you so much.